Good afternoon, everyone. I am a little bit late. I was in a meeting that ran a little over. And of course, at this time, I have leaf blowing going on at my condo, so I apologize. I can only hope that they stop soon. There's nothing that I can do about it, so I'm just going to go with the flow. So today, I'm going to be talking about consent. And I think a lot of times when people think about consent, they think about sexual consent, and I want to really expand that today and talk about moving towards a healthy yes as the norm and really uncovering what is your yes. What are your needs? What are your desires? And I really enjoy this quote. It's from Mark Brackett, and it says, "We are not born with an innate talent for recognizing what we or anyone else is feeling and why." And with consent, that is so important because that is why a verbal yes is always really reassuring versus just being like, oh, well, their body language said, we really don't know. Or someone can have a smile on their face and be having one of the worst days ever. It's just we don't inherently know what someone is thinking or feeling by just looking at them. And we also don't always connect with how we're feeling as individuals. There's a lot of times in life that people just push through and they don't take a moment to really think about what they're feeling, what their needs are in that moment, what their actual desires are. And so I just really like this quote because it's important that we practice that muscle of what we're feeling and what others are feeling. And so for today's objectives, I'm going to go over our VSP services, of course. We are going to define consent, talk about where we learn consent from, how people usually say no. We're going to talk about the power of a positive no, and then talk about yes, what are we uncovering when we say yes, and then finally bystander intervention. So RVSP operates on three main pillars: education, support, and advocacy. Education, like what I am doing right now, except usually there's not tons of leaf blowing in the background. Support, so I am the confidential advocate with RVSP. So if someone ever reaches out and they need help deciding what are their next steps towards healing, then I can help them just know all of their options, all of their rights, and then I will definitely put the ball in their court of what they want to do for moving forward. My support is not advice giving. I will never tell someone how they should move forward because it's a personal choice for each individual. But with support, I'm going to absolutely make sure that somebody feels safe, whether that's on campus, whether that's accessing emergency housing because it isn't safe to be in their home, or even if it's talking about academic accommodations. That's a huge one that we offer support with because oftentimes if someone is experiencing sexual or relational violence, then it's going to be hard to concentrate at school. So academic accommodations is huge. And then advocacy, I always think it's important for somebody to know I'm not going to support them directly and then not support them outside of that. So I am constantly working, and RVSP is constantly working on building a more nonviolent culture and changing the norms in our culture when it comes to about consent or just about what is okay to say, what is going to help work towards equality, and what is violent statements. And so it's not just when someone reaches out that we're trying to provide support, it's at a whole systemic level to end sexism. So I really kind of talked about these, but just to let y'all know, in terms of education, we do have our Teal Talk Tuesdays going on this month. This is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And then we are doing every Thursday, there's a presentation at 3 p.m. I know I was a little late today, again, because my meeting went over. And then we have our coffee and conversations led by our peer educators on our Instagram. So I highly recommend that people follow our Instagram. Just this past couple months, we were doing a Black women breaking the silence in the anti-violence movement because we do understand the need to really represent marginalized voices when it comes to the anti-violence movement. And then we also have our passive campaigns, like our Red Flag campaign happens during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, our Clothesline Project. Right now, if y'all stop by the UC Art Gallery, you will see that we have red dresses up for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we also have a Words of Hope and Healing wall. So if you want to write a message to survivors, absolutely please stop by and do that. We have loved seeing all the messages pour in. And I already kind of talked about support. So I'm gonna move through these ones. And I really just want to get to talking about consent. So I love this quote from Esther Perel. She's one of my favorite couples therapists that I like to read her books. Your partner never belongs to you. At best, they are on loan with an option to renew. It really wasn't until 1993 that marital rape was illegal in all 50 states, which just blows my mind because that's during my lifetime. There, and that really stems from this idea that if people entered a marriage contract, then a wife owed her husband sex essentially whenever he wanted it. Because it was like, if you entered this marriage contract, then you're willing to give your body to somebody. And so I really like this quote because that completely just dismantles that idea. Even if you are partners with someone, if you have been partners with someone in the past, or have hooked up with someone in the past, that never means that you owe them your body at any point in time. Your body is always yours. You should always have full agency over it, and nobody should ever guilt you into having sexual relationships with them at all. It should always be an exciting desire for yourself. And so I think it's important here, if you're watching, to really stop and think about what is your definition of consent. And oftentimes when I ask this question, I get a lot of different answers, right? Because there is no correct answer per se. It's just thinking of what is your definition. But essentially with consent, you'll hear a lot of no means no, or you'll hear yes means yes. That was newer. But really consent means it should be a positive, affirmative yes, with also no fear in the room, no coercion. The person, of course, has to be lucid to say yes. I know I have worked with people with cognitive disabilities, and there are times that you might ask a question and they might answer yes, but it is clear as the person who is in power in that moment, I absolutely know that they did not comprehend what they were saying yes to. So the person has to be lucid as well. I went through Instagram. I found some really great examples of consent images, like this one I loved. No doesn't mean convince me. Oftentimes you see in like romantic comedies, someone will turn down someone, but throughout the movie they will do romantic gestures or the people get closer. And so at the end of the day, it's like the couple ends up together and it's just like a constant pursuit. And in romantic comedies, this is completely normalized, but really if someone is saying no, we need to believe them and say, okay, you're saying no, and accept no in a graceful way. Like, I hear you. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for getting back to me, and move forward. Or I respect your boundary. I get where you're at. I move forward. A lot of times I think too with this, no doesn't mean convince me. If someone falls off the radar and they're ghosting and that's what their no looks like, it's really unfortunate and very harmful, because when people are ghosted, I think that can leave some ripple effects of just like, what did I do? Especially if they thought everything was going well. So I always tell students, if you're thinking about ghosting someone, really think about being transparent with them, saying why this isn't working out for you. And they should respect that. And if they don't, then that's a problem on their end. This next one, obviously the red cups. People are familiar with the game beer pong. So if alcohol is involved, you still need consent. And I would even venture on the side of if alcohol is involved, you really have to be cognizant, because there's no way that you can tell how alcohol is impacting the person that you're with or the person that you just met versus you. So to be on the safe side, I would always recommend, if two people are drinking and you're thinking about engaging in sexual activity, First of all, constantly verbally check in. Second of all, be aware that you might not be aware of if that person is lucid or not. Because again, you have no idea how alcohol is impacting their body. You don't know their tolerance level. And so you just really need to be mindful, because it is very possible when two people are drinking that when they wake up in the morning, especially if you don't know each other, don't have a history with each other, that one person might feel violated and the other person had no idea. And so I always just recommend, if you're out drinking, like wait till the morning, wait till you're more sober to engage in sexual activity and decide if that's what you both really want. And it's important to know that you can always change your mind, especially with dorm rooms on campus. When people are going to dorms, the setting is to where there's just a bed there often, and so that's the only place to sit. And then there might be this feeling of pressure as to, well, I invited them back to my dorm, so they're here, they're expecting sexual activity, so I should just give it to them. If at any point in time you decide that's not really what I want, or you decided at first, yes, I was okay with going to third base, now I'm okay with only kissing, that is completely okay. And no, even if you start having a sexual activity and you decide this just isn't what I want, even in the middle of an activity, you can say, never mind, I'm done. All of those things are perfectly okay. You can always change your mind, and nobody should ever make you feel like you owe them anything or make you feel bad for changing your mind. If that is what is happening, then that person doesn't deserve your attention or your energy. And then going back to that quote I shared earlier, just a reminder, people might not actually feel how you think they feel. That is why verbal consent is so important. Just asking, okay, is it okay if I touch you? Is it okay if I kiss you? Is it okay if I penetrate you? All of those questions are great questions to ask, and they don't have to be mood killers. I think a lot of times when talking about this in classrooms, people will be like, oh, well, that would completely ruin the mood. And it doesn't. It doesn't need to. It can just be a quick check-in, because you just don't know. Someone could be giving you body language that it's okay, but they could also be fearful of, well, what happens if they don't say it's okay? So just the importance of checking in, it can be so quick, and it can actually add to the moment because the other person feels like you respect them enough to ask. And I love this quote because it's just so accurate. If you won't take no for an answer, you shouldn't be having sex, because essentially you would be a predator. And so people that aren't taking no for an answer really shouldn't be interacting with other people at all, because that's just not okay, right? No means no, and we should all work towards having a society where we respect each other's boundaries. And this is UTA's policy definition of consent. It's voluntary, it's mutual. One act does not imply consent to another. Past consent does not imply future consent, and consent can be withdrawn at any time. So again, someone needs to be lucid. There needs to be no fear or coercion, so it's voluntary. Just because someone agrees to kiss somebody does not mean that they agree to groping, fondling, or any penetration. And just because someone made out last Thursday doesn't mean that they want to make out this Thursday. And coercion does not equal consent. So for anybody who doesn't know what coercion means, coercion is essentially when one person has more power or authority in the room. So there can be fear that if the other person doesn't agree to do what they say, that there's going to be repercussions for it. This can happen, I think a lot about the workplace. If you have a boss or a superior who maybe in the past you've had a romantic relationship with, and then all of a sudden they say, well, if you don't continue to have a romantic relationship with me or a sexual relationship with me, then I'm going to make sure you don't move any farther up, or I'm going to tell your supervisor, or I have these pictures of you, I could release them. So it's really anything that makes the other person fearful that if they don't engage in that activity, that they're going to have consequences. Like if someone says, okay, just tell your family, If someone says, I'm going to out you to the community, those are all examples of coercion. So again, it's when power is not evenly distributed, and then there is fear present in the room. Now I want y'all to think about how or when you learned about consent. And a lot of times this answer is different for everyone. And so for everybody, we really learn about consent at such a young age. So we often talk about like, oh, did you get the talk? When did you get the talk? If you ever got the talk, or people will say, well, they talked about it at school a little bit, but that was about it when talking about sex. But really, we're talking every day about consent, about how people have the right to their bodies, their boundaries being respected, values, pleasure. And so a lot of times people don't realize it, but we are talking about consent every single day. Even if it's, I know prior to COVID-19, it was like there are just tons of people who are huggers and they just automatically go up to someone and give them a hug. And if they go up with their arms wide open, it can be perceived as rude if the other person doesn't give them a hug back, or cold. And even that idea that someone's being cold if they don't want to hug somebody that they just don't want to hug, that's not okay, right? That's giving them the message about their body that your body is meant to people please and make sure that other people feel respected. Same way that when people are growing up, I always give the example that, you can have someone in your family and have a kid in your family, and that kid is told before they leave an event, oh, go give mom a kiss and hug, go give dad a kiss and hug, grandma. But they're told to go give people a kiss and hug. And if they don't do that, it's considered disrespectful, or mom, grandma will be like, oh, if you don't give me a hug, it makes me sad. And again, that's just giving someone a message like your body is really meant for other people to make sure that they're happy and not yourself. So we are giving the talk at such a young age, and we often aren't thinking about it, but we really need to be doing that. And a lot of times, especially with parents, I think that they need to have talks like don't have sex, make sure you don't get pregnant or an STI. Even some parents will say, just don't be stupid, make sure that you're thinking. And for people until they're 25, their thinking brain really isn't fully even developed. So a lot of times, especially as teens, people aren't thinking through what consequences might be. So first off, that's just not neurobiologically sound advice, really. It's just not developed yet. But what really most teens need for the talk, and when we're talking about consent, is to know that their feelings matter, their boundaries matter, that they deserve respect if they set that boundary. They also deserve pleasure. So sexual activity shouldn't just be for the pleasure of somebody else, it should be for you as well. They need to be given the message that only you get to control what happens with your body, and that consent is mandatory. It shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be seen as something that could be a mood killer. And that communication is key. So you want to be able to know your own wants and needs so that you can communicate that with other people and your own boundaries. And that there are lots of ways to increase safety when engaging in sexual activity, such as using contraception, barrier methods, and just making sure that you're seeing a primary care physician to get checked as well, and asking your partners if they're doing the same. And when we're talking about consent, I would always feel remiss to not talk about porn, because what we know is that most people are able to access porn, and a common age that people are accessing porn for the first time is about 12, because it's so easy to access on cell phones. And 12, like those early teen years, is often when people are talking about sex more, or hookups, or classmates are talking about it. And especially if parents aren't having conversations with their children about consent, about sex, then what happens is that teenagers will turn to porn to learn more about how to engage in sex because they might be ready to, or they just want to learn more in case they get in a situation that they want to. And so they turn to they turn to porn. And I loved this book by Peggy Orenstein. It's called Boys and Sex, Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity. So it really goes into a lot of depth about exploring rape culture. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that there isn't inherently a problem with porn, except people should definitely pay for it if they are watching it, because that can prevent more sex trafficking that people get into. But, there's nothing inherently wrong with porn. The problem with porn is that there's a lot of sexism that is portrayed in porn. So a lot of times in porn, sex is portrayed as something that men do to women rather than with women. So the women's pleasure is really meant to please the man, or the women's pleasure just isn't relevant at all. It's just making sure that the man is pleased and they are there for the man's entertainment. It's almost like they're objects just there to provide that entertainment to the man. And research has found associations between porn consumption and men's desire to engage in a range of aggressive behaviors, especially if the men drank regularly before sex, which with college-age populations, oftentimes there's a lot of access to alcohol, drugs, and so I think that that's really important to highlight, because there is a lot of choking that is shown in porn. Again, totally okay if it's consensual, but not okay if it's not. I know that the other day, a while back, I had read an article that someone was engaging in their first sexual experience, and they immediately were choked, and they thought that that was normal just because that's all they had seen in porn. It wasn't what they wanted, but they just thought that they had to accept it because that is the norm, which it's not the norm. But again, porn's going to show aggressive acts towards women a lot. And so that is what they thought was normal. And then among male college students, porn has been correlated with seeing sex as purely physical experience. Again, regarding girls as playthings or objects of conquest rather than people. So going back to that idea that they just are there for the pleasure of men. And college students of both sexes who report recent porn consumption have been repeatedly found to be more likely than others to believe in victim blaming and rape myths. I have some typos in that sentence that I need to fix. But essentially, because acts of aggression are shown towards women, or women are objects or playthings, those are all things that contribute to rape culture that we live in, the objectification of women, the hypersexualization of women. And when people have recently watched porn, oftentimes if they are presented with a rape myth, even though they might not, they don't think that they would ever think rape is okay, they're just more likely to think, oh, well, she wanted it, or she did this, so she deserved it, or was giving off signals that she wanted it, when really it was never talked about. There is no consent. And so it is important to realize that if you're watching porn, it's just really important to be mindful of these things, so that when you're engaging in your own sexual experiences, you can be mindful that consent, again, is the most important thing. Because again, nothing inherently wrong with porn. It's just, if you're going to engage in sexual acts, you want to make sure that everything that you're engaging in, if it is aggressive behaviors, that it's consensual, that you've checked in, maybe that you have a safe word. Just want to make sure that you are checking in. And so now I'm going to shift into the power of a positive no. So when we're talking about consent, there's the whole idea, no means no. And again, consent is not always sexual, right? Consent can be, can you put on your mask? Consent can be asking somebody, can I help you take off your jacket? Can I pull out this chair for you? I mean, consent can be so many different things, but it's really important to know what you are willing to say yes to and what you are willing to say no to. And the only way that you can do that is by uncovering your yes, uncovering what is important to you and your needs and desires. So I read this book a while back, The Power of a Positive No, Save the Deal, Save the Relationship, and Still Say No by William Ury. And I found this book so helpful because a lot of times the reasons that people don't want to say no, or they say no in a way that's maybe a little less direct, because we all say no in so many different ways, is because they're scared of not being able to save the relationship. So people say no in so many different ways. I know I have had so many times that I want to break a plan and I will sit on my phone and draft like 6 different text messages, coming up with different excuses, but basically just saying no to the plan that I initially said yes to. And I probably initially said yes to it wanting to say no, but just didn't have the courage to at that moment because I was scared to hurt somebody's feelings. And I know that that is not a characteristic I share just on my own. I know that so many people have done that. But saying no is such an important skill to be able to develop. Why? Because we have more access to information than ever. So we are making more choices than ever before. Even if you think about dating, we have access to dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, Grindr. I mean, there's just so many different apps right now to connect with people. And you have to learn like who do you want to say yes to, who do you want to say no to, and what qualities are important to you when thinking of who to say yes to. No can also be like, I don't know why, but I just immediately thought of the Cheesecake Factory menu. I mean, there's so many different options on that menu, and with so much access to options, you have to know what are your wants and desires. It's important to align your actions, words, and mind to head towards self-actualization. So if what you say out loud, what you're thinking in your mind don't align, then it's going to prevent you from being like the best version of yourself possible. You're going to feel some kind of disconnect because it's just not matching how you're presenting to the world and who you are inside. So the more that we can practice and build the muscle, knowing what our needs and desires are, knowing how to say no in a way that's not going to harm a relationship, the more that we can move towards aligning who we are as our authentic selves and presenting that person to the world and just being really genuine. And that's really the goal that people have. They want to be able to present themselves authentically, be seen by other individuals and accepted for who they are. So going into this question, I think it's important to think about, how do you feel when you say yes to something you don't want to do or don't agree with? And a lot of times if I'm giving this presentation or one similar and ask this question, people say, I feel like just later I feel angry, or I might feel resentment towards somebody because I'm just doing it to make them happy, not myself. I just feel upset with myself because I'm overcommitting when I know that my plate is already full. So usually the feelings that come up with this are definitely not good feelings to have. But knowing that that's good feelings aren't associated with agreeing to something that we don't want to do, it's like, why don't we do that? Why don't we just say no in the first place? And we often don't say no because we're really just trying to save that relationship. We're trying to save face. We're trying to make the other person happy, and we don't want to hurt their feelings. And so when we say no, we're really working on the difference of balancing, exercising our power, and tending the relationship. But we can do both at the same time. We can still build that relationship and exercise our power without hurting the other person's feeling. But the ways that we try to accommodate relationships is saying yes when we want to say no. We usually do these 3 A's. So we're saying yes because we want to accommodate their needs. So we're saying yes when we want to say no because we want to make room for them in our lives. Sometimes we do say no, but we say no poorly. I loved this quote by Ambrose Bierce: "Speak when you are angry and you'll make the best speech you will ever regret." I know that sometimes when people are saying, like, seeing red, when they're just really angry, their heartbeat's like way sky high, that the way that they speak to somebody that they care about is really just not acceptable. But they might say something like, "I'm not doing the dishes again. You always have me do the dishes. It's always my responsibility." So no, I'm not doing it again. And that is a very poor no, right? Instead of communicating, "I am feeling drained. I really need help with the dishes. So I know that you're asking me to do this, but I just don't have the capacity to right now." Like, those are two completely different ways to say no. And then sometimes if we want to say no, but we just don't want to have to confront the person, we avoid. We just don't say anything at all. So that can be seen as ghosting, right? When someone just doesn't get back to somebody, they're asking someone on a date and they just go off the radar, even though they were very responsive before. That's a way that we avoid saying no, but we're still damaging the relationship. So usually people do a combination of all three of these things. I know I've done all three of these things. I think most people have, right? It's when we are not wanting to say yes, but just don't know how to say no. So we engage in all these three things. And all these three things can actually really harm a relationship, even though we're not trying to, but it's just because we haven't built the muscle of saying no in a way that can still save and help our relationships. So the way to avoid falling into the 3A trap of accommodating, avoiding, or attacking, I was like, just completely blank my mind, is to have a positive no. So essentially, a positive no means saying yes to yourself, be grounded and rooted in your own desires and needs. Then, so you can pause, think about, okay, what do I really need in this moment before I say no? Like, your gut might be to say no, but then think about why. Why is it important for me to say no? And those should be your desires and wants. Then you can say no to assert that it is your power, you have that boundary, you have that right to say no. And then you can say yes again to just furthering the relationship. And you can give the person an invitation to satisfy their interest in some kind of way. You can point them in some other direction. You can say, "No, not right now. I have too much on my plate, but I would really love to do that later. Or I'd like to see some other way that I can help you out." So it's so important to uncover your yes. I don't know if y'all have seen this Yes Man movie, but I always thought it was so good. Essentially, start saying yes to everything, which he is not grounded in his own desires and wants, so becomes problematic to him. But it's just so important to uncover what are your needs, what are your desires, and uncover what you really want to build in your life. So by uncovering your yes, you're being proactive to knowing when you're going to want to say no and when you're going to want to say yes, versus just reactive when someone asks you a question, you are like, "Yeah, sure," even though you're not grounded in your desires and needs. So the way that you can uncover your yes is, first, when people are asking you a question, are asking you to do something, you can go to your balcony, which essentially means, just imagine that you are seeing this question in the distance and think about what your needs are. And think about, if you're seeing this question in the distance, what would you want to say versus being right there in that moment. So just take a moment, take a breath, really think about, okay, if you say yes to this, are you going to be happy? If you say yes to this, are you going to be resentful? Think about what the consequences to saying yes to this might be. And if you're having a hard time knowing whether you want to say yes or no, keep asking yourself, okay, why would I say yes? Is it for them? Is it for myself? Why would I say no? Again, is it for them or for myself? And then when you keep saying, like, why would I say no to this? Why would I say yes to this? You can start uncovering your underlying wants, desires, and interests. And it's important to acknowledge we all have needs, and the 5 most common needs are safety, survival. So like if someone's inviting you back to their place on your first date and that does not feel safe to you, your need in that moment is to feel safe. So you shouldn't feel like saying no is going to jeopardize your chances with this person. You should feel like you can say no by saying your yes to yourself first, right? No, I really don't want to tonight. You know, I just, for my purposes, I just feel a lot more comfortable going home tonight. But I hope that we have the opportunity to do that sometime in the future. And that shouldn't come off to the other person as just damaging the relationship. If they respect you, then they should respect your boundary and be okay with that. If they're not accepting that with grace, then that is probably a red flag that this is not going to work. Another basic need, just food, drink, and other life necessities, belonging and love, respect and meaning, like a meaning and a purpose, and freedom and control over one's fate. So there are these basic needs, and if you're saying yes to yourself, you're usually saying yes to one of your needs or one of your desires. And so if you root yourself in your own yeses to yourself of the life that you want to build, it becomes a lot easier to say no because you know you're saying yes to this is the life that I want, and whatever you're asking me isn't fitting into that. It doesn't make you selfish, it just makes you aware of what you want, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you see that someone isn't respecting somebody's no, it's important to say something and do something about that situation. So for example, if you see that you're at a party and someone's trying to take someone to a room with them and you can tell that other person's body language is saying no and that's not being respected, it's important to intervene, and you can do that in different ways. So you can do that by just running up to the person and being like, oh, I was just looking for you. Sally over here wanted us to go get a drink with her. So you can like discreetly pull them away from the situation. You can do this by being direct with somebody and saying, hey, I see you trying to take this person to a room. She really doesn't seem like she's feeling it, or she seems like she's had a bit to drink. I don't know if she's lucid. I think that, you know, for now, I want to just make sure she gets some water and something like a safe ride home. So there's just tons of different ways of saying no or intervening. You just have to figure out what works for you and keeps you safe in that moment as well. So even if it's at a party and you feel like someone's in danger, but you don't feel like you have authority to go over, you can try to find out like who does know this person and can go up and intervene too. So you can try to delegate who could intervene as well. But it's really important, if you see a situation that is giving you the gut feeling that something is not right here, just to speak up and do something about it while keeping your own safety in mind at the same time. So just to wrap up, again, if you ever need any resources, please know that I am here to provide support, confidential support. We are located in Ransom Hall 301, or you can email us. We also have our awesome counseling and psychological services, CAPS, our police department and crime victim services. Next week is Crime Victims' Rights Week. And then we have Title IX, our behavioral intervention team, and the Arlington Police Department. So please now, if you ever feel like you need anything at all, I'm here for you. It could be a relationship question. It could be a consent question. It could be wondering about a previous event and wondering if consent was given or not. Whatever it is, I am here to have those discussions. So just know that we are here for you and want to support you in any way that we can. And this is my contact information. So again, if you need anything, just let me know. Thank you. And I will see y'all next week.